Okay, so we also skipped chapter 8. We're going to go to chapter 9, which is new grievances. So in this book, it's page 95. So remember, the rest of the time that we skipped was basically Jean Valjean in prison and his different escapes. So not important, but now we're on 9. Sorry about the camera angle. I think it's a little bit better, but I'm all shadowy. So I'll get this eventually. When the time came for leaving prison and the strange words, "You are free," sounded in Jean Valjean's ears, the moment seemed improbable and unreal. A ray of vivid light, a ray of true light of living men, suddenly penetrated his soul, but it quickly faded. Jean Valjean had been dazzled with the idea of liberty, had believed in a new life. He soon saw what sort of liberty comes with a yellow passport. And there were other bitter blows besides. He had calculated that his savings during his prison stay should amount to 171 francs. True, he had forgotten to take into account the compulsory rest on Sundays and holidays, which in 19 years meant a deduction of about 24 francs. However, that might be his savings, had been reduced by various local charges to the sum of 109 francs and 15 sous, counted out to him at his departure. He understood nothing of this, and thought himself wronged, or more to the point, robbed. The day after his liberation, he saw before the door of an orange flowery distillery at Grasse some men unloading bales. He offered his services. They needed help and accepted him. He set to work. He was intelligent, strong, and skilled. He did his best. The foreman seemed satisfied. While he was at work, a gendarme passed, noticed him, and asked for his papers. He had to show the yellow passport. Jean Valjean resumed his work. A while before, he had asked one of the workmen how much they were paid per day for this work. The reply was 30 sous. That evening, because he planned to leave town the next morning, he went to the foreman and asked for his pay. The foreman did not say a word, but handed him 15 sous. He protested. The man replied, "That's good enough for you." He persisted. The foreman glared at him. "Watch out for the chain gang." Here again he felt he had been robbed. Society, the state, in reducing his savings, had robbed him wholesale. Now at the retail level, the individual was robbing him too. Liberation is not deliverance. A convict may leave prison behind, but not his sentence. That was what happened to him at Grasse, and we have seen the welcome he received at Digne. As the cathedral clock... Whoops. Lost you. As the cathedral clock struck 2, Jean Valjean awoke. It was incongruous what awakened him. Too much comfort. Remember, he's at the bishop's house. For nearly 20 years he had not slept in a bed, and though tonight he had not even undressed, the sensation was too novel not to disturb his sleep. He had slept over 4 hours. His fatigue was gone. He was not accustomed to many hours of sleep. He opened his eyes and looked for a moment into the darkness around him, then closed them to go to sleep again. When many different sensations have disturbed the day, when the mind is preoccupied, we can fall asleep once, but not a second time. Sleep comes at first more readily than it returns. Such was the case for Jean Valjean. He could not get to sleep again, and so he began to think. He was in one of those times when our minds are agitated with ideas. There was a kind of vague ebb and flow in his brain. His oldest and his most recent memories floated pell-mell and mingled confusedly, losing shape, swelling beyond measure, then abruptly disappearing as if in a muddy, troubled stream. Many thoughts came to him, but one kept reappearing, driving out all others. That thought was this. He had noticed the silver place settings and the large spoon that Madame Magloire had put on the table. These 6 silver sets obsessed him. There they were, a few steps away. The very moment he was going through the middle room to reach the one he was now in. The old servant was placing them in a little cupboard at the head of the bed. He had carefully noticed the cupboard on the right coming from the dining room. They were solid, old silver. With a big serving spoon, they would bring at least 200 francs, double what he had made in the 19 years' labor. True, he would have got more if the government had not robbed him. His mind wavered a whole long hour in agitation and struggle. The clock struck 3. He opened his eyes, rose up hastily in bed, reached out his arm, and felt for his knapsack, which he had put in the corner of the alcove. Then he swung his legs and put his feet on the ground, finding himself somehow seated on his bed. He stayed for some time lost in thought in that position, which would have looked rather ominous had anyone seen him there in the dark. He, the only one awake in the sleeping house. All at once he stooped down, took off his shoes, and put them softly on the mat in front of the bed, then resumed his thinking posture and was still again. In that hideous meditation, the ideas we have been describing persistently stirred up his mind, entered, left, returned, became a sort of weight on him. And then he thought, too, without knowing why, in a mechanical, obstinate reverie, of a convict named Revert, whom he had known in prison, and whose trousers were only held up by a single cotton knit suspender. The checked pattern of the suspender kept coming to his mind. He stayed in this position and would perhaps have remained so until daybreak, if the clock had not struck the quarter of the half hour. It seemed to be saying, "Come on." He rose, hesitated a moment, and listened. The house was still. He walked straight and cautiously toward the window, which he could just see. The night was not very dark. There was a full moon, across which flashed large clouds driven by the wind. Outside, this produced alternative light and shade, eclipses and illuminations, and indoors a kind of twilight. This glimmer, enough for him to find his way, changing with the passing clouds, was like that sort of pale light that falls through a cellar window, crossed back and forth by pedestrians. On reaching the window, Jean Valjean examined it. It had no bars, opened into the garden, and was fastened in the country fashion, merely with a little wedge. He opened it, but because the cold, crisp air rushed into the room, he closed it again immediately. He looked into the garden with an intensity that studies rather than sees. The garden was enclosed by a white wall, quite low and easy to scale. Beyond, against the sky, he distinguished the tops of trees at regular intervals, indicating that this wall separated the garden from an avenue or a lane planted with trees. Following this observation, he turned like a man whose mind is made up, went into his alcove, picked up his knapsack, opened it, fumbled in it, took out something, which he laid on the bed, put his shoes into one of his pockets, tied up his bundle, swung it over his shoulder, putting on his cap with the visor pulled down over his eyes, groped for his stick, and went to the corner of the window, then returned to the bed and resolutely took up the object he had laid there. It looked like a short iron bar pointed at one end like a spear. In the darkness, it would have been hard to make out the intended use of this piece of iron. Could it be a lever or a club? By daylight, it would have been recognized as nothing but a miner's drill. At that time, the convicts were sometimes employed in quarrying stone of the high hills surrounding Toulon. They often used miners' tools. Miners' drills are of a solid iron, terminating at the lower end in a point by which they are sunk into the rock. Taking the drill in his right hand and holding his breath, he moved stealthily toward the door to the next room, the bishop's, as we know. On reaching the door, he found it ajar. The bishop had not closed it. Okay, go ahead and pull quotes.